The words hit me like a physical blow, delivered in front of 200 wedding guests, who suddenly fell silent as death. "Only my real daughter gets my blessing," my father said, his cold eyes fixed on me as I stood beside my sister at her wedding reception. "The adopted one can sit down." I thought my world was ending. I had no idea my sister was about to change everything. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know, have you ever had someone stand up for you when you least expected it? Drop it in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe for more amazing stories every day. Now, let's go back to what should have been the happiest day of my sister's life. The Riverside Country Club was decorated like something out of a fairy tale. White roses and baby's breath draped every surface. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables set with the finest china, and the dance floor gleamed under twinkling lights strung overhead. It was exactly the kind of wedding Bethany had dreamed of since we were little girls, elegant and perfect in every detail. I stood at the head table in my maid of honor dress, a soft lavender gown that Bethany had chosen specifically because she said it brought out my eyes. My hands were shaking slightly as I held my champagne glass, waiting for the traditional father of the bride speech that would kick off the evening's toasts. The past 6 months of wedding planning had been a whirlwind of dress fittings, venue visits, and late-night phone calls with vendors. As Bethany's maid of honor, I'd thrown myself into every detail, determined to give my sister the perfect wedding she deserved. We'd grown closer during the planning process than we'd been in years, bonding over seating charts and flower arrangements in a way that reminded me of when we were children. But throughout it all, I'd felt the familiar undercurrent of tension that had defined my relationship with our father for as long as I could remember. Robert Caldwell was a successful attorney, a pillar of the community, and a man who had never quite figured out how to love a daughter who didn't share his DNA. I'd been adopted when I was 3 years old, after my birth parents died in a car accident. The Caldwells had been friends of my biological parents, and they'd stepped in to raise me when no other family could be found. It should have been a beautiful story of love and generosity, but the reality had been more complicated. While my adoptive mother Bianca had embraced me wholeheartedly from day one, my father had always kept me at arm's length. It wasn't that he was cruel or abusive, he was simply distant, treating me more like a house guest than a daughter. He attended my school events, paid for my education, and provided everything I needed materially, but emotionally there was always a wall between us that I could never quite breach. Bethany, on the other hand, was clearly the apple of his eye. She was his biological daughter. She was 4 at the time of my adoption, and she could do no wrong in his eyes. She had his sharp intellect, his commanding presence, and his ability to charm anyone in a room. Where I was quiet and studious, she was outgoing and charismatic. Where I struggled to earn his approval, she received it effortlessly. Despite this dynamic, Bethany and I had always been close. She'd never made me feel like less of a sister because of my adoption, and she'd often tried to bridge the gap between me and our father. "He just doesn't know how to show affection," she'd say, when I'd come to her in tears after another cold interaction with him. "It's not about you, Meredith, it's about him." But tonight, as I watched him stand up to give his speech, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. There was a hardness in his expression that I'd never seen before, a coldness that made my stomach clench with anxiety. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert began, his voice carrying easily across the reception hall, "thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate this joyous occasion." The crowd settled into attentive silence, champagne glasses raised in anticipation of the traditional toast. I smiled encouragingly at Bethany, who was glowing with happiness beside her new husband, Aiden. "As many of you know," Robert continued, "being a father is one of life's greatest privileges. Watching your child grow up, seeing them find love, celebrating their achievements, these are the moments that make all the struggles worthwhile." I felt a familiar pang of longing as he spoke. How many times had I wished to be included in that sentiment, to feel like one of the children he was proud to call his own? "Tonight, I want to talk about what it means to be family," Robert said, and something in his tone made me look at him more closely. There was a strange intensity in his eyes, a deliberation that seemed out of place for what should have been a warm, celebratory speech. Family isn't just about the people who live in your house or share your name. True family is about blood, about the bonds that can never be broken, about the connections that run deeper than circumstance or convenience. A chill ran down my spine. Where was he going with this? "Bethany," Robert said, turning to face my sister directly. "You are my daughter in every sense of the word. You carry my blood, my genes, my legacy. You are the continuation of our family line, and tonight, as you start your own family, I couldn't be prouder." The crowd murmured appreciatively, but I noticed several people glancing in my direction with confused expressions. The speech felt oddly exclusive, as if Robert was deliberately emphasizing Bethany's biological connection to him. "Which is why," Robert continued, his voice growing stronger and more pointed, "I want to make something very clear tonight. When I give my blessing to this marriage, when I welcome Aiden into our family, I'm speaking as the father of my real daughter." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I felt the blood drain from my face as the implication hit me. Around the room, I could see guests shifting uncomfortably, unsure of what they were witnessing. Robert's eyes found mine across the table, and what I saw there was unmistakable: cold, deliberate cruelty. "Only my real daughter gets my blessing tonight," he said, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "The adopted one can sit down." The silence that followed was deafening. 200 people sat frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips, staring in shock at the scene unfolding before them. I felt like I was drowning, like the air had been sucked out of the room and replaced with something thick and suffocating. I looked at Bethany, expecting to see embarrassment or confusion on her face. Instead, I saw something I'd never seen before: pure, undiluted rage. Her face had gone white, except for 2 bright spots of color on her cheeks, and her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "Dad," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "What did you just say?" Robert seemed surprised by her reaction. He said, "I said that only my real daughter." "Stop." Bethany's voice was quiet, but carried an authority that made everyone in the room lean forward. She stood up slowly, her wedding dress rustling in the silence, and reached for the microphone that her father was still holding. "Give me that," she said, and something in her tone made Robert hand it over without protest. Bethany looked out at the crowd of stunned faces, then back at our father, then finally at me. When our eyes met, I saw something that took my breath away: fierce, protective love. "I need to say something," Bethany announced, her voice now amplified across the room. "And I need everyone here to listen very carefully." She turned to face our father directly, the microphone held steady in her hand. "Dad, you just made the biggest mistake of your life." Robert's face flushed red. "Bethany, sit down. This is not the time or place." "No, this is exactly the time and place. You just humiliated my sister, in front of everyone we care about. You just tried to exclude her from our family on what's supposed to be the happiest day of my life. So yes, this is absolutely the time and place." She turned back to the crowd, her voice growing stronger with each word. "For those of you who don't know the full story, Meredith was adopted into our family when she was 3 years old. Her parents, who were dear friends of my mother and father, died in a tragic accident, and my parents stepped in to raise her." I could see people nodding, some of them wiping away tears as they remembered the story they'd heard over the years. "What you might not know," Bethany continued, "is that Meredith has been more of a daughter to this family than I could ever hope to be. While I was off to college, partying and figuring out my life, Meredith was here, taking care of our mother when she was sick.
While I was traveling the world and pursuing my career, Meredith was the one who came home every weekend, who sat through every doctor's appointment, who held Mom's hand during chemotherapy. I could see tears starting to flow down my cheeks. I'd never heard Bethany talk about those years, never knew she'd been aware of how much I'd sacrificed to care for our mother. Meredith was the one who organized Mom's medication schedule, who researched treatment options, who slept on the hospital floor for 3 weeks, Bethany said, her voice breaking slightly. She was the one who made sure Mom felt loved and supported every single day of her illness. She turned to look at our father again, and the anger in her voice was unmistakable. "And where were you during all of this, Dad? You were at the office, working late, taking business trips, finding every excuse you could to avoid dealing with the reality of Mom's illness. It was Meredith who held our family together during the hardest time of our lives." The room was completely silent, except for the sound of people crying. I could see our mother's friends dabbing at their eyes with tissues, remembering those difficult years when cancer had threatened to tear our family apart. "But that's not even the worst part," Bethany continued, her voice growing harder. "The worst part is that you've spent 25 years making Meredith feel like she doesn't belong in this family. 25 years of treating her like a guest instead of a daughter. 25 years of making her work twice as hard for half the recognition that you gave me just for existing." Robert tried to interrupt. "Bethany, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly. I understand that you've been jealous of Meredith since the day she arrived. Jealous that Mom loved her so completely, jealous that she was such a good kid, jealous that she made you look bad by comparison because she actually cared about this family more than her own ambitions."
The accusation hung in the air like a bomb. I'd never heard anyone speak to our father like this, never seen anyone challenge his authority so directly. "I understand that you've resented her because she reminded you of your own failures as a father and a husband," Bethany continued relentlessly. "Because while you were building your career and your reputation, she was building relationships and showing up for the people she loved." She turned back to the crowd, her voice now filled with a pride that made my heart soar. "I want everyone here to know something about my sister. Meredith graduated valedictorian from high school while working 2 part-time jobs to help pay for Mom's medical bills. She got a full scholarship to college, but turned it down to stay home and take care of our family." I was sobbing now, overwhelmed by hearing my sister articulate things I'd never been able to say myself. "She planned this entire wedding," Bethany said, gesturing around the beautifully decorated room. "Every detail, every flower, every place setting. She spent months making sure this day would be perfect for me, never asking for anything in return except to be treated like the family member she's always been." Bethany's voice broke completely as she looked at me. "Meredith, you are my sister in every way that matters. You're the person I call when I need advice, the person I trust with my secrets, the person I want by my side during the most important moments of my life. You're not my adopted sister. You're just my sister, period." She turned back to our father, and her voice became ice cold. "Dad, you just tried to exclude the best person in our family from your blessing. Well, guess what? I don't want your blessing if it doesn't include Meredith. I don't want anything from you if it comes with conditions about who deserves to be called your daughter." The room erupted in applause. People were standing, clapping, some of them openly weeping. I could see Aiden beaming with pride at his new wife, and several of our relatives nodding in agreement with Bethany's words. But Bethany wasn't finished. "There's something else everyone should know," she said, waiting for the applause to die down. "Something I discovered a few years ago when I was helping Mom organize some old papers." She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "I found these documents in Dad's old files. Letters, bank statements, receipts. Want to know what they show?" Robert's face had gone completely white. "Bethany, don't." "They show that Dad had an affair 15 years ago.
a year-long affair with his secretary that nearly destroyed our parents' marriage. Gasps echoed throughout the reception hall. I felt like I'd been hit by lightning. I'd had no idea about any of this. Mom found out and was ready to leave him. She'd already contacted a divorce lawyer, already started making plans to take us kids and start over somewhere else. She looked directly at our father, who seemed to have aged 10 years in the past few minutes. Want to know what stopped her? Want to know what saved your marriage and kept this family together? Robert said nothing, his face a mask of shame and defeat. It was Meredith, she said simply. Mom told me the whole story before she died. She said that watching how much Meredith loved our family, how much she'd already lost, and how much she needed stability, made Mom realize that some things were more important than her own hurt and anger. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All these years, I'd thought I was the outsider, the one who didn't quite belong, but I'd actually been the reason our family had stayed together. Mom said that Meredith's presence in our family reminded her what unconditional love looked like. Bethany continued, tears streaming down her face. That seeing how completely Meredith had embraced us as her family, despite losing her birth parents so young, inspired Mom to fight for our family instead of giving up on it. She turned to me, her voice soft but clear. Meredith, you didn't just join our family, you saved it. And Dad has spent 15 years resenting you for it because you represent everything he almost lost through his own selfishness. The room was completely silent, except for the sound of crying. I looked around and saw faces filled with shock, sympathy, and anger on my behalf. Our relatives, our family friends, people who'd known me since I was a child, they were all looking at me with a new understanding of what I'd endured. Bethany walked over to where I was sitting and took my hand, pulling me to my feet. Meredith, I need you to know something. You are not the adopted daughter in this family. You are my sister, my parents' daughter, and one of the strongest, most loving people I've ever known. She turned back to the microphone, still holding my hand. Dad, you have a choice to make right now. You can apologize to Meredith for 25 years of making her feel like she wasn't good enough, or you can leave my wedding, because I will not celebrate the biggest day of my life with someone who can't recognize how lucky we are to have her in our family. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Robert stood frozen, his face cycling through emotions: shame, anger, defiance, and something that might have been regret. The entire room waited, 200 people holding their breath to see what would happen next. Finally, Robert straightened his shoulders and looked directly at me. For a moment, I thought he might actually apologize, might finally acknowledge the pain he'd caused. Instead, he said quietly, I think it's best if I leave. The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. Several people started to protest, but Bethany held up her hand for silence. Then leave, she said simply. But know that you're not just walking away from my wedding. You're walking away from both your daughters. Because if Meredith isn't welcome in your life, then neither am I. Robert's face crumpled slightly, as if he was finally understanding the magnitude of what he'd done. He looked around the room at the faces of friends and family members, all of them staring at him with expressions ranging from disappointment to disgust. Bethany, he said, his voice barely audible, you don't mean that. I absolutely mean it, Bethany replied firmly. I've watched you hurt my sister for 25 years, and I've stayed quiet because I thought family meant accepting people's flaws. But what you did tonight wasn't a flaw, it was cruelty, and I won't be part of a family that treats Meredith as anything less than the incredible person she is. Robert looked at me one last time, and I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Genuine remorse. But it was too late for regret. The damage had been done, not just tonight, but over decades of small rejections and deliberate exclusions. I'm sorry, he said quietly, though whether he was apologizing to me, to Bethany, or to the room in general was unclear. Then he turned and walked out of the reception hall, leaving behind a stunned silence and 2 daughters who were finally free to define family on their own terms. As the door closed behind him, Bethany turned back to the crowd. "I'm sorry you all had to witness that," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "But I'm not sorry it happened, because now everyone knows what I've always known, that Meredith is the heart of this family, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve to be part of our lives." The applause that erupted was thunderous. People were standing, cheering, some of them openly weeping. I felt overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, by the realization that so many people had seen what I'd never been able to see myself, that I belonged, that I was valued, that I was loved. Aiden stepped forward and took the microphone from his new wife. "I just want to say something," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've known this family for 3 years now, and I've watched how Meredith takes care of everyone around her. She's the one who remembered my mother's birthday when Bethany forgot. She's the one who helped me pick out the engagement ring. She's the one who made sure every detail of this wedding was perfect because she wanted Bethany to have the day of her dreams." He looked directly at me. "Meredith, I'm honored to call you my sister-in-law, and I want you to know that in our family, mine and Bethany's, you will always be welcome, always be loved, and always be treated with the respect you deserve." Bethany pulled me into a fierce hug, and we stood there crying together while 200 people cheered around us. "I love you," she whispered in my ear. "I should have said something years ago. I should have stood up to him sooner." "It's okay," I whispered back. "You said it when it mattered most." The rest of the evening was magical in a way I'd never expected. Without Robert's disapproving presence, the celebration felt lighter, more joyful. People came up to me throughout the night to share their own stories of feeling like outsiders, to tell me how much they admired my strength, to express their outrage at how I'd been treated. Later in the evening, it was time for my maid of honor speech. I'd written and rewritten it dozens of times over the past few weeks, wanting to find the perfect words to express how much Bethany meant to me. But after everything that happened tonight, my carefully prepared remarks seemed inadequate. I stood up, my hands shaking slightly as I took the microphone. The room fell quiet, and I could see faces looking at me with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. After the drama of earlier, everyone was probably wondering what I would say. When Bethany asked me to be her maid of honor, I was honored, but also terrified. How do you sum up a lifetime of love and gratitude in a few minutes? How do you tell someone how much you mean to them when words feel so small? I looked at Bethany, who was watching me with tears already forming in her eyes. Most people think they know our story. The adopted sister and the biological daughter raised in the same house, but always somehow different. And for a long time, I believed that narrative too. I thought I was the lucky one who got taken in, the outsider who was graciously allowed to stay. The room was quiet, everyone hanging on my words. But tonight, my sister showed me something I'd never fully understood before. Bethany didn't just defend me, she chose me. In front of everyone who matters to us, she made it clear that family isn't about biology or blood or who came first. It's about who stands up for you when the world tries to tear you down. I turned to face Bethany directly, speaking to her as much as to the crowd. "Bethany, you have been my protector since the day I arrived in your family. When I was scared and confused and missing my birth parents, you were the one who crawled into my bed during thunderstorms and told me stories until I fell asleep. When kids at school asked why I didn't look like our parents, you were the one who told them that the best families are the ones that choose each other." Bethany was crying openly now, and I could see Aiden reaching over to squeeze her hand. "You taught me what real love looks like," I continued, my own voice breaking. "Not the kind that has to be earned or proven, but the kind that just exists, steady and unwavering, no matter what. You never made me feel like I had to compete for my place in our family. You just made room for me and acted like I'd always belonged there." I paused, looking around the room at all the faces watching us.
family, friends, people who'd known us since we were children. Tonight, when someone tried to make me feel small and unwanted, you didn't hesitate. You didn't worry about keeping the peace or avoiding conflict. You just stood up and said, "Not my sister, not on my watch." And in that moment, you gave me something I'd been searching for my whole life, the absolute certainty that I belong somewhere. The room was so quiet I could hear people sniffling, trying not to cry. Bethany, you are the strongest, most loyal, most fiercely loving person I know. You're the sister who drove 4 hours to bring me soup when I had the flu after Mom's passing. You're the one who called me every day when Mom was sick, making sure I wasn't carrying the burden alone. I looked at Aiden, including him in my words. Aiden, you are getting an incredible woman. But more than that, you're getting someone who will fight for your family the way she fought for me tonight. Someone who will choose love over convenience, truth over comfort, and loyalty over everything else. You're getting a wife who will stand by you no matter what storms come your way. I turned back to Bethany, my voice growing stronger with each word. And Bethany, you're getting a husband who saw what you did tonight and fell in love with you all over again. I watched his face when you stood up for me, and I saw a man who was proud to call you his wife. You're both getting partners who understand that real love means protecting the people you care about. I raised my champagne glass, and the rest of the room followed suit. So here's to Bethany and Aiden, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the reception hall. May your marriage be built on the same foundation that our sisterhood has been. Unconditional love, unwavering loyalty, and the courage to stand up for each other when it matters most. The applause was thunderous. People were standing, cheering, many of them openly weeping. Bethany jumped up from her chair and pulled me into a fierce hug, both of us crying and laughing at the same time. "I love you so much," she whispered in my ear. "Thank you for seeing the best in me, even when I didn't deserve it." "Thank you for choosing me," I whispered back, "tonight and every day before it." As we held each other, I realized that this was what I'd been searching for my whole life. Not just acceptance, but celebration. Not just tolerance, but fierce, protective love. Not just a place in the family, but the certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. The speech had been about Bethany, but in giving it, I'd finally found my own voice. I'd finally understood that I wasn't the adopted daughter who'd been lucky enough to find a family. I was the sister who was chosen, defended, and loved without condition. And that made all the difference in the world. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, many of them stopped to hug me, to tell me how moved they'd been by what had happened. Our mother's best friend, Mrs. Whitmore, took my hands in hers and said, "Your mother would be so proud of both of you girls tonight. She always said you were the glue that held the family together." Our cousin David, who'd flown in from California for the wedding, shook his head in amazement. "I had no idea Uncle Robert had been treating you that way," he said. "If I'd known, I would have said something years ago. What Bethany did tonight, that took real courage." Even some of Robert's business associates, men who'd known him for decades, approached me with apologies. "I'm ashamed that I never noticed," said his law partner, Mr. Larman. "You've always been such a lovely young woman, and you clearly adore your family. What happened tonight was inexcusable." As Bethany and Aiden prepared to leave for their honeymoon, she pulled me aside for one final conversation. "I need you to know something," she said, taking my hands in hers. "What happened tonight doesn't change anything between us. You're still my maid of honor, you're still my sister, and you're still the person I want by my side for every important moment in my life." "What about Dad? He's still your father, Bethany. I don't want to be the reason you lose your relationship with him." Bethany's expression hardened. "He's the reason I'm losing my relationship with him. What he did tonight was unforgivable, but it wasn't the first time. I've been watching him treat you like a second-class citizen for years, and I should have said something sooner." She squeezed my hands tighter.
Meredith, I meant what I said up there. If he can't accept you as his daughter, then he can't have me as his daughter either. Some lines can't be uncrossed. But what if he apologizes? What if he tries to make things right? Then we'll deal with that when it happens, but it would have to be a real apology, not just words. He'd have to acknowledge the damage he's done and commit to doing better. And honestly, I'm not sure he's capable of that kind of growth. 6 months later, I was sitting in the living room of the house Bethany and Aiden had bought, watching my sister unwrap tiny baby clothes and baby toys. She was 4 months pregnant with their first child, glowing with happiness and excitement about becoming a mother. Robert had tried to reach out several times since the wedding. Awkward phone calls, stilted emails, and even a few attempts to show up at my apartment unannounced. But his apologies felt hollow, focused more on his own discomfort than on the pain he had caused. He seemed to want forgiveness without accountability, reconciliation without real change. Bethany had been firm in her boundaries. She'd told him that until he could genuinely acknowledge the harm he had done and commit to treating me as an equal member of the family, she wasn't interested in rebuilding their relationship. It's not about punishment, she had explained to me after one of his calls. It's about protection. I won't expose my children to someone who thinks love is conditional on biology. The baby shower was filled with friends and family members who'd become my chosen family over the years. Mrs. Whitmore was there, along with several of our mother's other friends who'd watch us grow up. Our cousins had driven in from out of state, and even some of Bethany's college friends had come to celebrate Bethany. As I watched Bethany unwrap tiny clothes and baby toys, I felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what family looked like. People who chose to love and support each other, who showed up for the important moments, who created space for everyone to belong.
Aunt Meredith, Bethany said suddenly, holding up a tiny onesie that read, "My aunt is my hero. This one's from me." Aiden nodded in agreement. "We've already decided that you're going to be the godmother," he said. I felt tears spring to my eyes. If something ever happens to us, we want our children to be raised by someone who understands what it means to love unconditionally. The room erupted in applause, and I felt that familiar surge of belonging that had become so much stronger since the wedding. A year later, I was holding my nephew, baby James, while Bethany recovered from a difficult delivery. He was perfect. Tiny fingers, dark hair like his father's, and eyes that seemed to take in everything around him with curious intelligence. "He looks like you," I told Bethany, who was exhausted but radiant. "He looks like family," she corrected. "Our family, the family we chose to build together." Robert had sent a card and flowers when James was born, along with a request to meet his grandson. Bethany had politely declined, explaining that until he could treat all members of the family with equal respect, he wouldn't be part of her children's lives. It was a hard boundary, but it was necessary. Bethany was determined to raise her children in a home where love wasn't conditional, where belonging wasn't based on biology, where everyone was valued for who they were rather than where they came from. I want James to grow up knowing that family is about choice. I want him to understand that the people who love you, support you, and show up for you, those are your real family, regardless of blood or law or any other arbitrary distinction. As I rocked my nephew to sleep, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. The pain of feeling like an outsider for so many years, the shock and humiliation of that wedding speech, and the incredible gift of my sister's fierce loyalty and love. I thought about our mother, who'd chosen to fight for our family, partly because of the love I'd brought into it. I thought about all the ways I'd tried to earn my place, not realizing that I'd belonged all along to the people who truly mattered. Most of all, I thought about Bethany's courage in standing up for me when it mattered most. She'd risked her relationship with our father, disrupted her own wedding, and chosen love over convenience in a way that had changed both our lives forever. The little boy in my arms stirred slightly, and I whispered to him the words I wish someone had said to me when I was small and scared and trying to figure out where I belonged. "You are loved. You are wanted. You are exactly where you're supposed to be."
with people who will choose you every single day for the rest of your life. And as I said the words, I realized they were true for me too. I'd spent 25 years trying to earn my place in a family that had already claimed me. It had just taken a wedding speech and my sister's fierce love to help me finally understand that I'd been home all along. An absolutely powerful story about chosen family, sibling loyalty, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Have you ever had someone stand up for you when you least expected it? Share your stories in the comments below. If this story of Meredith, Bethany, and the true meaning of family touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories about the bonds that matter most. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.